All right, so today we're setting sail with one of history's most celebrated naval heroes,
Horatio Nelson.
Horatio Nelson.
That's right.
But before we dive into his, incredible wartime exploits and the Battle of Trafalgar, we're going to kind of rewind a bit
Yeah,
and look at what shaped this guy,
absolutely.
who was this seemingly ordinary kid from a small English village who ended up, becoming such a legend.
I think that's the most interesting part of Nelson's story is that he wasn't, born into some naval dynasty or, groomed for greatness from the cradle.
Right.
He comes from this very unassuming background.
Yeah, you sent over some excerpts from a history podcast that's looking at a new Nelson biography.
Here's a new one.
And I'm really fascinated to unpack these kind of key moments from his early life and see how those maybe foreshadowed or shaped the hero he became.
Well, I think what often gets overlooked is that Nelson's story starts so far from the image we have of him, on the deck of a warship amidst the, roar of cannons and crashing waves.
Right.
Picture this sleepy village in Norfolk.
Okay.
Burnham Thorpe.
Burnham Thorpe.
That's where young Horatio, a pretty sickly child by all accounts, spent his early years.
Not exactly the picture of a fearless admiral.
No, not at all.
Right.
It makes you wonder how a boy who grew up in, tranquil countryside could become this, almost mythical figure.
Right. Yeah, his father was a vicar.
Edmund Nelson.
Edmund Nelson. Okay, so very gentle, very bookish.
A kind man by all accounts.
Right.
But not exactly, cut from the same cloth as,
A swashbuckling.
yeah, swashbuckling sea dog.
Right.
But his mother,
Okay, Catherine.
Catherine Nelson, now she seems to have been a bit more of a force.
Okay.
A very strong personality,
Oh,
a fierce patriot,
interesting.
and with, shall we say, a strong dislike of the French?
A little bit of an understatement.
Perhaps.
Okay.
But she really instilled in him this potent mix of, love for his country and a sense of rivalry with France.
Yeah, it really is incredible to think about how these kind of seemingly small influences early on can have such a ripple effect on the course of someone's life.
It's like those early seeds, they get planted and then they blossom.
And speaking of kind of early signs, I was struck by that anecdote about young Nelson and the pears.
Ah, yes. The infamous pear stealing incident.
Right.
No, this wasn't just a case of, a boy with a sweet tooth.
Sure.
He stole those pears because his classmates were too afraid to climb the headmaster's garden wall.
Oh?
He was the only one brave enough.
So even as a kid, he was kind of like testing his limits.
Yeah, he had that boldness, that willingness to lead where others hesitated.
Almost like a mini rehearsal for his later exploits.
Absolutely.
And that yearning for adventure, well, it led him at the age of 12 straight into the heart of the Royal Navy.
The world of opportunity.
But also pretty harsh realities.
Oh, absolutely.
But-
The Navy was a tough place.
Right. A lot of,
Brutal conditions, disease. Discipline was incredibly harsh.
But you could advance through merit,
In theory, yes. But
Yeah.
nepotism was also rife.
of course.
It was who you knew as much as what you knew.
And it seems like Nelson navigated that world pretty skillfully.
He did. He had a knack for, catching the eye of the right people.
His first posting took him to the Caribbean.
A taste of the exotic.
Right.
He would have encountered new cultures, new environments,
A whole different world.
a glimpse into the vastness of the British Empire.
And then he ends up on an expedition to the Arctic.
Yeah, searching for the Northwest Passage.
The Northwest Passage.
One of those enduring mysteries of the age.
Wow.
Could there be a sea route across the top of the world?
Now, the story of him facing off against a polar bear, I've heard that one too.
It's a good story.
Right.
Makes for a great legend.
Maybe a little embellished,
Possibly.
but still to be, 15 years old
15.
and enduring those conditions.
The freezing temperatures,
Hmm.
the isolation,
The darkness.
the constant threat of, storms and icebergs.
Answer shows.
Incredible resilience.
Yeah.
I mean, those early voyages really forged him,
It wasn't just adventure, though.
No, it was a hands-on education
Right.
in seamanship,
He's honing his skills
navigation, learning the complexities of global trade.
and also getting kind of a front row seat to the geopolitics of the British Empire.
Oh, absolutely. He was seeing firsthand how the world worked, the
Right.
power dynamics, the rivalries.
The state.
It was all there in front of him.
And it's fascinating because you see this dedication to learning, even in something as simple as his weather logs.
He kept meticulous records.
Yeah. Throughout his whole life.
It reveals a mind that was constantly observing, analyzing, trying to understand not just what was happening, but why.
Yeah, always striving to improve.
Absolutely.
And of course, he didn't just encounter, storms and icebergs. He encountered people who would have a huge impact on him.
Oh, absolutely. Mentors, rivals. The Navy was a melting pot of personalities.
Right. And one of those key figures was Captain Locker.
Ah, yes, a real guiding force in Nelson's early career.
What was it about Locker that seems to have resonated with Nelson?
Locker was known for his bold approach to naval warfare.
Okay, so he encouraged Nelson to think differently.
To challenge the conventions.
To not be afraid to push boundaries.
Exactly. He instilled in Nelson this principle.
Okay.
Lay a Frenchman close and you will beat him.
Lay a Frenchman close and you will beat him.
Now, this was a departure from the traditional, somewhat cautious tactics of the time.
Right.
Locker believed in aggressive action and exploiting the strengths of the Royal Navy.
Firepower discipline.
Yeah, getting close and unleash your firepower.
Wow, it's amazing to think that a single phrase could have such an impact.
Those kinds of guiding principles, they can stay with you. They can shape your whole outlook.
Absolutely. But of course, Nelson's early career wasn't all about, mastering seamanship and refining tactics.
Right.
He also encountered the darker side of the British Empire.
Yeah, the shadow of slavery.
It's a complicated aspect of Nelson's story that we can't ignore.
No, we have to grapple with it.
Especially considering, his time in the Caribbean.
The heart of that horrific system.
Right.
It inevitably shaped his views on the world.
Now, the sources you provided paint kind of a nuanced picture.
Yeah, it's not a simple black and white issue.
There's that controversial letter denouncing abolitionism.
Right, but there's debate about its authenticity.
Some scholars think it might have been manipulated after his death.
By those who supported slavery.
Right.
They kind of use Nelson's name to further their agenda.
It's a good reminder that, historical narratives are rarely straightforward.
Oh, absolutely. They're constantly being reshaped, reinterpreted,
There's always more to uncover.
Always.
What I find interesting is that even with that letter taken into account, there's no evidence that Nelson was personally racist.
No, not in his writings or his actions.
He even spoke very highly of a black servant.
Described him as good a man as ever lived.
It really highlights the complexity of the man and the era.
Right. We can't judge historical figures solely through the lens of our own time.
But we also have to acknowledge the moral dilemmas they faced.
Absolutely. It's about understanding the past in all its shades of gray.
Right. So we've talked about, his early influences, his naval education, his encounter with the dark side of the empire.
Right.
What about his personal life?
Well, back in England, he found peacetime a bit too quiet for his liking.
Understandable.
He craved action. He craved challenge.
And he ends up marrying Fanny Nisbet.
A respectable woman.
Yeah.
Provided him with a sense of, domestic stability.
But maybe not exactly the passionate spark a man like Nelson sought.
Perhaps not. But their wedding was witnessed by a figure who definitely embodied that spark.
Oh, who was that?
Prince William Henry.
The future King William V.
The future king, a notorious scoundrel,
Wow. I can only imagine the stories those two could tell.
I'd love to have been a fly on the wall for some of their conversations.
But all that domesticity was about to be swept aside.
By the winds of change blowing across Europe.
Because the French Revolution...
Ah, yes, that momentous event.
Was shaking the foundations of Europe.
It was a time of upheaval of radical ideas.
And I'm guessing for someone like Nelson, with his, deep loyalty to the crown and his
dislike of the French.
Right. It must have been a mix of apprehension and maybe even a bit of anticipation.
Oh, I think so. On the one hand, he was ideologically opposed to the revolution's ideals,
Liberty, equality, fraternity.
Yeah, those ideas were seen as dangerous, subversive.
But on the other hand...
On the other hand, the turmoil meant war was likely.
And war meant...
The chance for glory, the chance to prove himself.
It's like a Shakespearean drama unfolding, right?
It really is. You've got these clashing ideologies, a nation on the brink.
And our hero waiting in the wings.
And remember, this is the same man who once told a midshipman to hate a Frenchman as you do the devil.
Wow, a chilling reminder of, the intensity of his beliefs.
He was a man of his time, deeply patriotic.
Right.
And shaped by the events that swirled around him.
And in 1793, those events came to a head.
War was declared.
Between Britain and France.
And Nelson given command of the HMS Agamemnon.
Set sail.
In his words, health and great spirits.
The beginning of a new chapter.
One that would test his metal shape, his legend, and etch his name into the annals of history.
And even amidst the seriousness of war, we get these little glimpses of humanity.
Like what?
Well, like the fact that Nelson's crew nicknamed the Agamemnon
Eggs and bacon.
Eggs and Bacon.
I love that it just shows, even in the midst of these grand narratives.
There's always that human element.
Always.
The things that make history come alive.
The little details, the quirks, the humor.
It reminds us that these were real people.
With their own story.
Their own hopes and fears.
Absolutely.
And those stories are what make history so compelling.
They're the threads that connect us to the past.
And help us understand who we are today.
Exactly. So we've seen, the seeds of Nelson's ambition planted in his youth. But as we move into his wartime career, what really strikes me is how that early spark of daring kind of explodes into this
unstoppable force.
Yeah, it's like he had this internal compass guiding him towards greatness.
But it wasn't just about, personal glory, was it?
No, I don't think so.
There's that deep sense of duty that's always present.
Absolutely, that unwavering loyalty to his king and country.
It's almost like those two things are intertwined.
Yeah, the ambition and the duty, they kind of fuel each other.
And that combination combined with his willingness to push the limits, that's what made him such an exceptional leader.
He wasn't afraid to challenge conventional tactics to take risks that others might have seen as reckless.
Like at the Battle of Cape St. Vincent.
Oh, yes, in 1797.
He just throws the rule book out the window.
Instead of sticking to the traditional line of battle,
he disobeys orders.
And charges his ship, the Captain, straight into the heart of the Spanish fleet.
I mean, that's a gutsy move.
It was a gamble for sure.
That was also brilliant, wasn't it?
To understand why it was so brilliant, you have to picture the scene, the line of battle. It offered a degree of order, but it often led to these drawn-out engagements, inconclusive results.
Nobody really winning.
Exactly. And Nelson saw an opportunity to completely disrupt that.
But break the line.
To concentrate his firepower and create chaos in the enemy ranks.
So it wasn't just about being daring. It was about seeing a tactical weakness and exploiting it.
Absolutely, using his aggression to turn the tables.
And it worked.
Oh, spectacularly. The victory at Cape St. Vincent cemented Nelson's reputation as this brilliant, unorthodox commander.
He's knighted, he's the toast of the nation.
He becomes a hero.
But Nelson's daring didn't always lead to triumph.
No, the Battle of Tenerife, a few months later.
That was a different story.
A daring nighttime raid that went disastrously wrong.
It's a reminder that even the best laid plans can go awry.
War is unpredictable.
You can't control everything.
There's always an element of chance of fog of war.
And for Nelson, the cost at Tenerife was immense.
He loses his right arm.
To grape shot.
A brutal weapon.
Just imagine the pain, the sense of loss.
It must have been devastating.
But even faced with this setback, Nelson's spirit doesn't break.
No, he returns to service with even greater determination.
Like he's fueled by this almost mythical sense of destiny.
It's incredible, that resilience.
He refuses to let adversity define him.
And it leads him to one of his most famous pursuits.
1798.
Napoleon has slipped past British surveillance.
Landed in Egypt.
It falls to Nelson to hunt him down.
This is high-stakes naval cat and mouse.
The fate of nations hanging in the balance.
And Nelson's relentless.
Scouring the Mediterranean, chasing every rumor, every lead.
Driven by this absolute determination to find and defeat Napoleon.
And that pursuit culminates in one of the most celebrated victories in naval history.
The Battle of the Nile.
The French fleet anchored at Aboukir Bay. They think they're safe.
And then Nelson arrives.
And throws their complacency into disarray.
He doesn't engage in a traditional broadside battle.
No, he divides his fleet, sends some ships to attack from one side,
while others slip between the French ships and the shoreline,
catching them in a deadly crossfire.
It's a tactical masterpiece.
A devastating display of Nelson's understanding of naval warfare.
It's more than just a victory.
It's a turning point.
Napoleon's ambitions in the East are shattered.
His army is stranded in Egypt.
Nelson is hailed as a national hero.
The Battle of the Nile, it's a demonstration of the effectiveness of decisive action.
Not just engaging the enemy,
but utterly destroying them.
And that legacy has shaped naval strategy ever since.
But even amidst these grand victories, we have to remember the human cost of war.
Nelson's not immune to that toll.
He suffers from recurring illnesses.
The phantom pain of his amputated arm.
The weight of the lives lost under his command.
And as his fame and glory grow,
his personal life becomes increasingly complicated.
The affair with Emma Hamilton?
The wife of the British ambassador to Naples?
It becomes a public scandal.
A source of fascination and condemnation.
It reminds us that even the greatest heroes are still human.
They have passions, desires, vulnerabilities.
And those complexities are what make Nelson so intriguing.
He wasn't just a symbol of naval prowess.
He was a man grappling with the contradictions of his time.
Driven by ambition, haunted by loss, and ultimately shaped by the events that swirled around him. And so we come to 1805, the year that would define Nelson's legacy.
The Napoleonic Wars are at their height.
The threat of invasion hangs over Britain.
Napoleon, with his ambitions of conquering Europe, knew he needed to control the seas.
And standing in his way,
Horatio Nelson.
a clash of titans.
Nelson, commanding the British fleet, faces his greatest challenge yet.
A combined French and Spanish armada poised to sweep across the English Channel.
The fate of Britain hanging the balance.
And it all comes down to one encounter.
Off the coast of Spain.
Cape Trafalgar.
A name that echoes through history.
A symbol of both triumph and tragedy.
And at the heart of it all is Nelson.
The architect of a daring plan that would defy naval tradition.
He was never one to play it safe, was he?
Imagine the scene. Two massive fleets converge.
The traditional approach would have been a parallel line of battle.
A predictable exchange of broadsides.
But Nelson had a different vision.
He splits his fleet into two columns.
And sails straight into the enemy line.
Cutting their formation in two.
It was a gamble.
Exposing his ships to potentially devastating fire.
But also a stroke of genius.
By breaking the line, Nelson disrupts their plans, creates confusion, forces them to fight on his terms.
He used his knowledge of wind and currents to control the battle.
A masterclass in naval tactics.
And then there's that signal.
England expects that every man will do his duty.
11 words that captured the spirit of the moment.
Nelson understood the importance of morale.
He inspired his men, not just through strategy, but through words that resonated deep within them.
He knew victory depended on the commitment of every sailor.
And they didn't disappoint.
The battle was a brutal, close-quarters fight.
A maelstrom of fire and fury.
But Nelson's tactics prevailed.
The British fleet crushed the Franco-Spanish forces,
capturing or destroying most of their ships.
Trafalgar was a resounding victory.
A testament to Nelson's brilliance and the bravery of the Royal Navy.
It secured British naval dominance for a century.
And ended Napoleon's hopes of invading England.
But victory came at a terrible price.
Nelson, leading from the front, as always,
was struck by a French sharpshooter's bullet.
A fatal wound.
In the hour of his greatest triumph.
His death transformed him into a martyr.
A symbol of sacrifice and patriotism.
His image forever linked to Trafalgar.
An icon of British national pride.
It's almost like a Greek tragedy.
The hero rising to unimaginable heights, only to be struck down at the pinnacle of his glory.
And yet his legacy endures.
His courage, his innovative tactics, his unwavering belief in duty.
These qualities continue to inspire.
So we've journeyed from Nelson's humble beginnings to the thundering roar of Trafalgar.
We've seen how ambition, talent, and a touch of fate shaped a legend.
What stands out to you about his life?
What resonates most is his sense of purpose. He believed in something greater than himself, a cause worth fighting for.
In a world often driven by cynicism and self-interest.
That unwavering conviction is a powerful reminder.
It's inspiring.
Nelson's story is a testament to the human capacity for courage, resilience, and the spirit of adventure.
It reminds us that history is more than just dates and facts.
It's about the lives of individuals who dared to dream, to strive, to make a difference.
And that's what makes history so compelling.
It's a reflection of ourselves.
Our hopes, our struggles, our triumphs.
And as we've seen with Nelson,
our flaws and contradictions.
It's a reminder that even amidst the grand sweep of history,
it's the individual stories that truly captivate us.
The stories that connect us to the past.
And illuminate the human condition.
So as we conclude this deep dive into the life of Horatio Nelson,
we hope it has sparked your curiosity.
And inspired you to continue exploring the endlessly fascinating world of history.
Keep questioning, keep seeking. Keep diving deep.